Today I'm going to talk about octave technique at the piano. Playing octaves is actually quite a challenging aspect of technique, which is why it shows up in a lot of virtuoso passage work in the literature. I'm going to show you in this video some of the ways that I approach octaves technically in my teaching. The octave exercise I'm going to show you is exercise number 38 from Dohnányi's Essential Finger Exercises. There are lots and lots of different ways to practice octaves, and there are many different exercises and exercise books you could use. I just happen to be showing you exercises from the Dohnányi Essential Finger Exercises because I use them myself and I use them with my students. So first of all, I'm going to show you how this exercise is set up. Now this is a pretty straightforward exercise. It just involves doing ascending and descending scales which move up the keyboard chromatically. You do an ascending harmonic minor scale, and then you do a descending major scale, ascending harmonic minor, this descending major. So I'll show you how that works. We're going to start on C minor. We're going to play an ascending C harmonic minor scale. Then we overshoot that by a half step and we come down on D flat major. Then we go up on C sharp minor, coming down on D major, D minor, etc. So that's how it is structured. Now I really like this exercise for several reasons. First of all, it only moves by steps, and therefore you can really isolate your technique for octaves, and you can really spend some time thinking about how you're approaching the piano, how much finger, wrist, and arm you're using, and how to relax while you're doing it. Second of all, it's an exercise that you can play fast or you can play slow, and it really helps you clean up your accuracy on octaves. And I also like this exercise because not only do you practice your octaves, but you get really comfortable with scales beyond just using regular scale fingering, because you have to learn how to jump from one note to the next in the scale. I want to take a moment to ask a really important question. What is so challenging about playing octaves? I mean, playing octaves is legitimately hard. I find it challenging, my students find it challenging, and you could even have like a whole piece learned, but then the octave passage is the part that always trips you up or where you get fatigued. So I think it's hard to play octaves accurately because you are relying on having your hands spread and moving around from one octave to the next. It's also hard to play octaves at a very fast tempo. You might find that you practice octaves and you play them fine at a slow tempo, but then when you speed it up, you get very frustrated because it just doesn't work anymore. Also, playing octaves can cause a lot of tension all the way up the arm, and it can cause pain and even lead to injury. And also, playing long passages of octaves leads to issues of stamina. So here's the thing about octave technique. Octaves are a trap. It can cause an enormous amount of tension if you aren't careful about how you practice it. When you practice octaves slowly, you can end up practicing them with a lot of tension, and then when you speed it up, that tension is still in there, and that's when you get into a lot of technical problems. There are multiple ways to play octaves, and Dohnányi himself knew this because in the instructions for this exercise, he indicates that you should practice it forte from the arm, and you should practice it piano from the wrist. So I'm going to show you both approaches today in this video. First of all, to play forte from the arm, that means that we're going to use the whole arm mechanism from the elbow up. And this is what it looks like. So you can see that my motions are quite large, and you can hear that it's pretty loud the way I'm playing. So when you play octaves loud from the arm, there are 4 things to keep in mind. First of all, it's very important to keep the hand loose. You don't want to just create a fixed extended hand and then just play, because that is what is fatiguing about playing octaves. You want to have a loose hand and a stable wrist but not locked. And it's important to relax the thumb in between each octave, as I was doing in the air. So in other words, if I'm playing into the keys from the arm, then I'm actually going to do a little mini release in the air between octaves. So in slow motion, it looks like this. and then I come up in the air. I call this having puppy paws, because you know how dogs sit like this? And so, like this, puppy paw, right? This is a great way to practice it. Coming up and feeling your hand just close to get rid of that rigid feeling. When I come into the keys from my arm, my wrist is relatively stable, although it's not tight. But also, it's kind of like what I said in the chords video, that as you reach into the octave, I'm gripping just a little bit. I'm doing a little bit of that with the fingertip. The other way of playing octaves, broadly speaking of course, is to use your wrist and play quietly. So you're going to want to hinge at the wrist and have a kind of tapping motion from the hand. Okay, wrist not too low, not too high, not like this, but also not like that, like really like that. You can actually do this exercise this way. You can go 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. And notice my elbow is relatively still, right? I'm not doing like a big also motion here. So. It's much easier to play fast octaves when you're hinging at the wrist and when you're not using your whole arm. And that's for two reasons. First of all, the larger the muscle groups you use to play the piano, the slower you're going to have to play, because it's just takes more time to engage larger muscles and make bigger motions. And then secondly, playing loud and playing fast are actually in opposition to each other. And when you hear people play long passages that sound really, really loud and powerful, actually, not every single note is equally loud. They're not going like, because that's not sustainable. That involves a lot of tension, and you're going all the way to the bottom of the key on every single note. And instead, what you do is you play strategic loud notes, right? And so if I want to play, making it seem like I'm playing all of it loud, I'll play the first note loud, and then I'll group, and then, right? And so what I'm doing here is actually I'm only playing the first note loud, the fifth note loud, and then the ninth note, and everything in between is grouped. The irony is that it can actually sound more powerful if you don't play every single note equally and super loud, because it organizes the notes in such a way that they go by faster and they sound grouped, and it sounds like even faster than you're playing. Two more things I want to say about playing octaves from the wrist, and one of them is that it's very important to move in and out as you go in and out of the black keys with the wrist, because you don't have your whole arm hinging this way, so you have to actually move using your upper arm and anticipate where you're going, right? And so that's one great thing about this exercise, is it teaches you the pattern of major and minor scales using octaves, which is really handy for when it does actually come up in the literature. Because if you're not used to moving, then you can end up at the last minute grabbing like that, right? So I'm anticipating all of the black keys. The way that I get around the instrument then involves how I use my arms and how I spring from one note to the next. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, relaxation is super, super important for successful octave technique. You want to make sure that you are relaxing your shoulders. A lot of times when we play octaves, there's a kind of a locking of the shoulders that happens. It's almost like you clench your jaw, you clench your shoulders, and then you just kind of go for it. Consciously relax your shoulders. And here's a quick exercise for how to do that. Raise your shoulders to your ears, and then relax. Again, breathe in, and then relax. And you should feel that your shoulders are really nice and loose compared to that. After that, you want to relax your elbow. It's very easy to kind of fix the elbow in place and then try to play octaves like using the whole arm even from the shoulder. and you need to have a relaxed wrist. Whether or not you're using the technique from the arm or from the wrist, it's important that the wrist not be tight inside. And of course you need to have a loose thumb, because if your thumb is tight, then your whole hand is tight, then your whole hand is rigid, then your whole hand position collapses, and then you're just playing like this. And you can play a few octaves that way, but playing a long passage is just not going to work. Another very important thing to relax actually is your jaw. So often pianists will set their jaw and then play a really difficult passage. So as you're working on octaves, and even this exercise or an exercise like it, make sure you're practicing loosening your jaw and not holding tension there. Now I want to say, just like any of these technical exercises that I'm talking about, if you feel any pain in your forearm, that's the sign that you need to stop, because what that means is you're putting strain. It means that you're tightening your thumb, you're tightening your wrist, and you're not relaxing in between octaves. And so you need to take a break from practicing your octaves, because that's what inflamed your arm in the first place. Let the pain totally subside, and then go back to practicing it with renewed caution. That's a good opportunity maybe to take some lessons and bring that to your teacher to have them troubleshoot what you might be doing in your octave technique. All right, so I have 4 additional tips for practicing octaves. The first one is release in the direction of the next note you're about to play. Make sure that your arm, that you're releasing in the direction of that note, whether it's stepwise motion as in this exercise, or if it's something that has a lot of jumps in it, because then when you play it fast, you're moving already in that direction of the note that's coming next. Another tip is to be very, very aware of tightness in your thumb. Playing tight in your thumb causes tightness in your wrist, which causes a whole chain reaction of tension that will then go up to your arm, and then that causes fatigue, and it makes it really, really hard to play a long passage of octaves. My next tip is to minimize the amount of time that you're keeping your hand stretched out. Basically, the principle to keep in mind is that it is very fatiguing to keep your hand extended like this for any length of time. If you just hold your hand up in the air like this, eventually you'll start to feel a little bit of a fatigue and burning sensation in your hand and even up your arm. And so you need to find a way to minimize the actual length of consecutive time that your hand is extended. And so what you're basically doing when you're practicing octave technique is training yourself to put in tiny, tiny little micro relaxation moments in between each octave. And then my last tip is just about this question that a lot of people have about whether to use 5 or 4 on octaves. And I think it just really depends on the size of your hand, and it also depends on the context. In this exercise, I actually practice it both ways because my hands are big enough to reach 4, but I also play it with just 5s so that I can have the practice of doing both. But the thing that you want to avoid is this shape of your hands. So you want to avoid your hands looking like that. And so for a lot of people, including me in certain contexts, playing 4 forces your hand to do that, and then you just want to avoid that by playing 5 on everything, because look how nicely the hand stays aligned when I use 5. When I use 4 and I turn, I'm exaggerating to show you. And we want to keep the hand aligned and the arm behind the hand as much as possible. I made a demo video of a complete playthrough of this whole Dohnányi exercise, and I do it 2 times in the demo. I first of all play it super loud from the arm using that motion, and then I play it quietly from the wrist using that motion. And then I encourage you to check it out, because you'll see exactly what my arm and wrist look like when I play it. Good luck with your octave technique. I'll see you in my next video, and happy practicing.